Hello, I am Shaka Sali. Welcome back to Straight Talk Africa, coming to you live from Washington. If you have just joined us, today's topic, we have opened the telephone lines for you, the audience, so that you may ask any question that may be on your mind, or make any comments or express an opinion that reflects the concerns of your community or neighborhood. In other words, it's your show, you set the agenda. And our distinguished guests are Frederick Ngoga Gateretse, Regional Manager for Africa, IJET Risk Systems, and Dr. Chiza Besigye, President of the Forum for Democratic Change. He joins us live from our studios in New York. Gentlemen, I have to say I'm profoundly honored and exceedingly humbled to have the opportunity to host the two of you on Straight Talk Africa.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Now, you heard, of course, what Dr. Besigye was saying, and I was wondering, Besigye has lived that experience.
Yes.
He has made his contributions. He has also been a victim, as he says. You have been studying that. You have done a lot of research, and in fact, you earn your living really based on following some of these activities.
Yes.
Someone may wonder, really, what is the criteria for deciding who is a legitimate liberation organization and who is a terrorist organization? In other words, what is really the difference between a terrorist and a liberator? Because some actually say that one man's liberator may in fact be another one's terrorist.
Absolutely. Let's first make a distinction between transnational terrorism and insurgent groups or liberation movement that are labeled as terrorists by their governments. I think that it is quite evident that, when you talk about, for example, Al-Qaeda, we're talking about these groups who have an ideology and who pretty much fund operations that pretty much push their agenda, and they operate across continents. Now, when it comes to Africa, what we have these liberation movements that are sometimes labeled as terrorist group.
Sometimes opposition to political parties.
Sometimes opposition to political parties. Terrorism, by definition, I think I was reading it the other day, it's pretty much the use of violence to push for an agenda. Now, if you follow that definition...
Targeting or hitting non-military targets?
The use of violence in general.
Even hitting military targets?
Even hitting military targets. It is terrorism. You're using violence to push for an agenda. Following that, by that definition, pretty much what you're saying is that anyone who takes up arms and who conducts ambushes, as the NRM did during the liberation struggle, or other groups, SPLA or UNITA or so on, by definition, what they were doing was those were acts of terror. Now, how do you label who is a terrorist and who is a liberation fighter? I think that...
who decides that?
The international community, depending on their agenda, and pretty much, and some regimes, are so horrendous. For example, he was talking about...
when we talk about the international community, let's be very simple, so that our viewers, our listeners can begin to understand exactly what we are talking about. When we say the international community, what exactly are we saying? Are we saying that African countries are not part of this international community? Who is the international community?
That's $1 million question.
What do you
the international community, I would argue, let's take the 5 members of the Security Council.
Right.
We have France, China, the United States, Russia, and
France.
I think I mentioned the UK as well. Those are the ones pretty much, because of the power, the finances as well. Those are the ones who pretty much set the agenda. They set the agenda. So I would even say.
But isn't Russia?
Russia as well.
Isn't it fighting? Isn't it? Conducting terrorist acts against Chechnya?
Absolutely. By definition, what they're doing is acts of terrorism as well.
But that's not the way they look at it?
Yes, that's not the way they look at it, but it is. By definition, what they're doing is acts of terror. That's terrorism. And it is interesting because, no one should justify what other groups like these radical groups are doing in the world. But when you take a look at what some states do to other states, or what some states do to support groups who are inflicting harm and unimaginable destruction to other countries, you wonder really, how do they come up with these definitions? How do they put some groups in one category and the others in another? That's really a debate that even some scholars are still struggling with, to be honest. Somewhat, I myself.
Does it have something to do with interests, perhaps?
Absolutely, it has to do with interest. We were talking about the case of the SPLA, for example, the SPLA in Sudan. Mm-hmm. I think that it has been determined that the regime in Khartoum, the NCP regime, was an undemocratic regime, a regime that actually still labeled as state sponsor of terror, mm-hmm. and this was a regime that was committing horrendous crimes in Darfur and so on, in South Sudan as well, and everybody decided to support the SPLA. And in fact, I would say that the struggle of the SPLA, people were fighting for their own rights. Mm-hmm. We all know what was happening in South Sudan. But what they were doing, picking up arms and attacking, installations and so on, by definition, that was terror. When you pick up arms, mm-hmm. when you conduct ambushes, those mm-hmm. are terror.
But what about the SPLA?
That's what they were doing was also terror by definition. Now, what Dr. Besigye was saying was right. He was saying that when you have good governance, when people have avenues, peaceful avenues to contest, oppression or so on, you don't have those groups. But sometimes people are forced to take up arms. Now it becomes it's a very tricky thing. How you label which group is a terrorist group, which is not a terrorist group.
I see. Let's go to the lifeline of the